Clara had always been invisible to the Hadleys. Every day she cleaned the grand mansion, and every day Mrs. Hadley found something to belittle her about. "Clara, you missed a spot," Mrs. Hadley would bark, her sharp voice cutting through the silence. Clara would nod, holding back her frustration, but inside, a simmering resentment grew. She was more than the maid. She was the daughter of the rightful heirs to this mansion. And what they didn't know was that Clara was about to change everything. The wealth, the mansion, the empire, it all belonged to her. It was time for the Hadleys to understand that nobody could hide the truth forever. This house wasn't theirs, it was hers. And as Clara stepped through the halls, the realization of her true inheritance began to settle like an iron fist. The moment came when Clara found the will, a yellowed, crumpled document hidden deep in Mr. Hadley's study. Her father's signature was unmistakable. She ran her fingers over the paper, shock and disbelief flooding her senses. Clara wasn't just the maid, she was the rightful heir to everything the Hadleys had stolen from her family. The inheritance, the mansion, the wealth, it was all hers. As Clara read through the legalese, her pulse quickened. The betrayal of a lifetime stared back at her from the pages. The Hadleys had deceived her mother, convinced her that Clara wasn't even worthy of knowing the truth. But now, it was clear. The Hadleys had no claim to what was rightfully hers. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place. She wasn't just cleaning their home. She was about to take it back, and she would make sure the world knew her name. Clara's blood boiled as she pieced together the depth of the fraud the Hadleys had committed. It wasn't just about the money. It was about everything. They had manipulated her family's business, forged documents, and stolen her inheritance. The Hadleys had long portrayed themselves as benevolent. But Clara knew better. They were greedy, self-serving people who had built their empire on lies. Her father had worked tirelessly to build his business, to leave a legacy for Clara, and they had robbed him blind. Her heart sank as she thought about how her mother had trusted the Hadleys, how they had been deceived by their false promises. The betrayal stung deeper than anything. But Clara was no longer a maid who cleaned their floors. She was their worst nightmare, and she was going to take everything from them. The mansion, the wealth, the legacy, it was all hers, and she wasn't letting go. Clara's journey into the Hadleys' dark past was like peeling back the layers of a rotten onion. Each document she found, each record, revealed more of their lies. The Hadleys had been laundering money, hiding assets, and pretending to be moral pillars in society. But now, the truth was out, and Clara was determined to expose them. She pored over every scrap of evidence, each discovery driving her further into the web of betrayal and deceit. She found offshore accounts, forged signatures, and dirty business deals that had kept her family in the dark. She wasn't just going to take back her inheritance. She was going to expose the Hadleys for everything they had done. They thought they could get away with it, but Clara wasn't going to let them. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was the one who would tear down their empire piece by piece. Clara's next move was to secure her position legally. She contacted one of the top estate lawyers in town, someone with the experience and clout to take on the Hadleys. When she walked into his office, Clara felt like a different person. She wasn't just an employee anymore. She was a woman on a mission. The lawyer was shocked when Clara laid out the documents in front of him. It wasn't just about money. This was a case of fraud and illegal activity. "This is huge," the lawyer said, his voice filled with disbelief. "The Hadleys won't know what hit them." Clara felt a surge of power as the lawyer began laying out a strategy. She had taken the first step. The Hadleys had underestimated her, but now she had the proof to take them down. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. Clara's first confrontation with Mrs. Hadley was nothing like she had imagined. She walked into the grand living room, where Mrs. Hadley sat in her usual position of control. Clara placed the legal papers on the coffee table with a quiet but firm resolve. "You don't know what you're doing," Mrs. Hadley sneered, her eyes narrowing as she tried to hold on to her authority. "This is my house, my family's legacy." Clara felt the words sting, but she didn't flinch. "It's not yours," Clara said, her voice steady and calm. "It's mine, and I'm taking it back." The shock in Mrs. Hadley's eyes was enough to satisfy Clara. For so long she had been humiliated and pushed around. Now the tables had turned. The power was in Clara's hands, and the Hadleys couldn't deny it. The battle had officially begun. Clara's legal battle had just begun, but already the Hadleys were fighting back with everything they had. They hired the best lawyers, spread lies, and attempted to undermine Clara's credibility. The media took an interest in the story, sensationalizing Clara's rise from maid to heiress. "Maid claims billionaire's fortune," read the headlines. The Hadleys wanted to make it seem like Clara was the villain, the thief, but Clara wasn't backing down. She had the truth on her side, and she was fighting for her inheritance. The more the Hadleys tried to destroy her, the more Clara felt empowered. She wasn't just some servant in their mansion. She was the one who would bring them to their knees. The storm of legal battles, media attention, and personal conflict was just beginning, and Clara was ready for it. The truth finally came to light. Clara's lawyer uncovered mountains of evidence, from hidden accounts to forged signatures. The Hadleys could no longer deny what they had done. The public, once skeptical, began to rally behind Clara as the media broke the story. "Hadley family caught in billion-dollar fraud," read the headlines. Mrs. Hadley's reputation, once flawless, was now in tatters. The world was learning the truth. The Hadleys weren't the rich, untouchable family they had pretended to be. Clara wasn't just the maid they had mistreated. She was the rightful heir, and now she had the power to take back everything they had stolen. The mansion, the wealth, the legacy, it was all hers. And the Hadleys had no one to blame but themselves. The storm was over, and Clara was the one who had come out on top. The final confrontation took place in the courtroom. Clara, dressed in her finest, stood tall before the judge. The Hadleys' lawyers tried to spin their story, but the evidence was undeniable. Clara had spent months collecting proof, bank records, legal documents, testimonies from former employees. Mrs. Hadley sat in the witness chair, looking broken for the first time in her life. "This isn't just about money," Clara said, her voice steady. "It's about the truth." The judge looked at the documents, nodding in acknowledgement. The decision was final. Clara was awarded her inheritance, everything the Hadleys had taken from her. The Hadleys were left with nothing. The victory was Clara's, but it didn't come without its emotional toll. The price of victory had been high, but in the end, justice had been served. Clara was no longer just the maid. She was the owner of it all. Clara stood outside the mansion, her eyes scanning the horizon. The battle had been long, but now it was over. The mansion, the empire, the fortune, it was hers. But Clara wasn't just focused on wealth. She had changed, and so had her perspective on power. She wanted to rebuild the family's legacy, not based on the corruption of the Hadleys, but on something new, something honorable. She wasn't just the heir to a stolen fortune. She was now a woman who would reshape the future. As she looked out at the vast estate, Clara smiled. The Hadleys had underestimated her, but they couldn't stop her. The world would remember Clara Remington not as a maid, but as a woman who had risen from the ashes and claimed her rightful place. The mansion wasn't just a home, it was a symbol of everything she had overcome. Clara had always dreamed of running the empire her father built, but now that she had control, the weight of leadership was becoming almost unbearable. As she sat in the mansion's study, looking at the legal papers, contracts, and reports that needed her attention, Clara couldn't help but feel the overwhelming pressure. She had spent years wishing for this day, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready. The responsibility of running an empire, of making decisions that affected not just her, but hundreds of people weighed heavily on her. Every decision Clara made felt like it could define her legacy, for better or worse. She wasn't just building a business anymore, she was building an empire. And with every new decision, she feared losing the values she held dear. She had fought for power, but at what cost? Could she maintain her integrity while leading this vast empire? Clara took a deep breath, determined to remain true to herself, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the burden of power was going to change her more than she realized. The more Clara reflected, the clearer her next challenge became. She had the empire, the wealth, and the power, but there was still one question she couldn't shake. What kind of leader did she want to be? She could follow in the footsteps of the Hadleys, using manipulation and secrecy to maintain her position, or she could use her power for good, building a business that served a greater purpose. Her decision weighed on her heavily. The business world didn't care about ethics. It was about results. And Clara knew that if she wanted to survive, she would need to compromise. But the idea of becoming the very thing she had once despised haunted her. Clara looked at the documents on her desk, expansion plans, new partnerships, investments, and wondered if the path to success was really worth it. Would she be sacrificing her soul for wealth? For the first time, Clara didn't have an answer. The fear of losing herself in the pursuit of power was real. Could she truly be the leader her empire needed without losing her way? Just when Clara thought things were settling, an unexpected visitor arrived. Vincent DeLuca, the billionaire mogul who had once shown interest in merging with her business. He came with a proposal, but this time his offer wasn't just about business. It was about power. Vincent promised Clara more than just wealth. He promised her global dominance, the kind of influence that would make her untouchable. His charm was undeniable, and his pitch was enticing. But Clara wasn't naive anymore. She knew that Vincent's motives were more than just about growing her business. It was about control. He wanted to control her, her decisions, her future. "You and I could conquer the world together, Clara," Vincent said, his eyes gleaming with ambition. Clara felt a rush of temptation, but deep down, she knew that this was a dangerous game. She had fought for her independence, and she wasn't about to let someone like Vincent take that away. But as she looked at the proposal, she wondered, was this her chance to become a true power player in the world? Or was she about to be swept up in a scheme that could cost her everything? Clara sat alone in the mansion's grand ballroom, staring at the massive estate that had once belonged to the Hadleys. The weight of the decision settled heavily on her shoulders. Could she really turn down Vincent's offer? The financial security, the global influence, it would set her up for life. But as Clara looked out over the mansion, she realized something. This empire was hers. She didn't need anyone to help her. She had spent her entire life being underestimated, and now she had everything she had ever wanted. She didn't need to rely on Vincent's help. Clara stood up, her eyes determined. "I can build this empire on my own," she whispered to herself. This was her moment. She had already proved that she could rise above the Hadleys' manipulation and make her own way in the world. She was no longer the maid. She was a CEO. And she would shape her empire according to her own vision, not someone else's. Clara wasn't afraid of being alone in this fight. In fact, she was ready to face it on her own terms. No one was going to control her anymore. As Clara built her empire, the divide between her and her family grew. Her mother, who had once trusted the Hadleys, couldn't understand why Clara was so determined to cut them out of her life. "They're still family," her mother would say, her voice full of concern. But Clara couldn't see it that way. The Hadleys had betrayed her family, and Clara couldn't pretend that the bond they had was still intact. She had struggled for years, working in their mansion, taking their insults, and now they were trying to worm their way back into her life. "They've manipulated you, Mom," Clara would say, her voice firm. "They've stolen from us, and now they want to make us feel guilty for standing up for ourselves." But her mother, still blinded by the years of trust in the Hadleys, couldn't fully understand. Clara felt the emotional distance growing between them. She loved her mother, but she couldn't forgive the Hadleys. Clara knew that in order to truly move forward, she would have to cut ties with the people who had once been her family, even if it meant losing her mother's trust. It wasn't easy, but Clara was determined to create a new future, one where the Hadleys had no place. The past had a funny way of coming back, especially when you least expected it. Jenna, who had once been a loyal ally in Clara's battle against the Hadleys, returned to Clara's life with an offer that felt too good to be true. She wanted to work with Clara on the next phase of her business, to help her expand and reach new heights. But something felt off. Clara couldn't put her finger on it, but she knew Jenna had changed. The Jenna Clara had trusted was no longer the same woman standing before her now. "I can help you take this empire to the next level, Clara," Jenna said, her voice laced with ambition. Clara, still wary from past betrayals, took a step back. She had lost trust in the people closest to her before, and she wasn't about to let herself be manipulated again. But Jenna's offer was tempting. Was she just being paranoid, or was Jenna truly working for her benefit? Clara knew she couldn't afford to make the same mistake twice. Trust had become a luxury Clara could no longer afford. She had learned the hard way that betrayal could come from the least expected places. But this time, Clara would protect herself and not let anyone take what she had worked so hard to build. The more Clara spent in the business world, the more she felt the emotional cost of being at the top. She had fought so hard to reclaim the mansion, to build her empire from the ashes of the Hadleys' deceit. But the more success she gained, the more she began to lose. Clara was isolated. She had no one to turn to, no one she could trust completely. The weight of her decisions was beginning to feel too much to bear. She had sacrificed her peace for this empire, and it was starting to feel like it wasn't worth it. The business meetings, the constant pressure to expand, the endless stream of people who wanted something from her. It was exhausting. Clara stood in the grand hallway, looking at the mansion she had won, and wondered if this was really what she wanted. She had achieved everything she dreamed of. But at what cost? Was this the price of power? She had built an empire, but she had lost herself in the process. The truth was, Clara was beginning to feel more empty than she ever had before. Clara had everything, but she realized she was missing the one thing she truly needed: peace. She began to reevaluate her role in the world, not just as a business leader, but as a person who had lost touch with what really mattered. After losing her way, Clara decided it was time to give back to those who had helped her. She launched several initiatives focused on community building, providing jobs for those who had been left behind by the world of wealth and power. This wasn't just about financial success anymore. It was about creating a legacy that could truly make a difference. Clara didn't need more power. She needed to heal herself and help others. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of betrayal, now became a place of hope, where Clara could start making things right. She wasn't just going to take control of the world. She was going to change it. The final test came when Clara had to decide whether to expand into new markets or focus on what she had already built. The pressure from her advisors was immense, but Clara had learned the lesson her father had tried to teach her all along. True success wasn't measured by how much money you made. It was about the impact you had. Clara chose to continue focusing on creating an ethical empire, helping others rise along with her. She had reclaimed her inheritance, reconstructed her family's empire, and forgiven the past. The mansion was no longer just a symbol of revenge. It had become the foundation of a new future. Clara had learned that power wasn't about controlling people. It was about empowering them. Her empire wasn't just about wealth. It was about creating sustainable, ethical businesses that would serve the community and the world. Clara knew that her work wasn't done, but she had finally found peace. The mansion was no longer a symbol of betrayal. It was a symbol of growth, redemption, and the future Clara had built. Clara sat in the study, surrounded by towering stacks of papers. The weight of running the entire empire was taking its toll. She had spent years working to build the mansion back into something powerful, but now that she had it, The constant pressure to expand felt like a burden. The world was watching, and with every decision she made, Clara was reminded of how much she had to lose. The Hadleys had once ruled with fear, but now Clara had to prove that she could lead with integrity. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the reputation she built. Could she remain true to her values while running this empire? Her mind raced with doubt. She had always been the one to do the work. But now, she had to become something more. A leader who could guide others while maintaining her humanity. The guilt lingered. Could she carry the weight of all this power without losing her soul? She had to be the strong leader she had always dreamed of being. But as the weight of the decisions began to settle, Clara realized that her journey would be a constant balancing act, a struggle between what she wanted and what was right. As Clara sat in her office, staring at the blueprints for the next phase of her empire, she was confronted by a decision that would change everything. She had achieved success, beyond what she could have imagined, but now the question loomed, how much of herself was she willing to compromise? The Hadleys had always believed in ruthlessness. To succeed, they took what they wanted no matter the cost. But Clara wasn't like them. She had always believed in the power of honesty and integrity. Yet, the business world had no room for softness. To compete, Clara knew she would need to act decisively, perhaps even aggressively. But could she truly lead without compromising her values? The tension was growing. With every decision, she felt more and more like she was becoming someone she had once hated. Clara's mind weighed the options. Do I take the lucrative deal that could make me the most powerful, or do I stick to my ideals? The emotional turmoil of the decision was starting to unravel her. She needed a break, but there was no time for that. Clara had to choose now, success or integrity. The pressure was mounting, and Clara realized this was a test of who she wanted to become. Clara had begun to think she was on the path to redemption, but then Vincent DeLuca reappeared. He had been a charming figure in the early days of her rise to power. He had helped her see the business side of things, encouraged her to be more bold and assertive, but now his presence was a threat. Vincent had made a proposition, something that sounded too good to be true. He wanted to merge their empires, combine their wealth and influence to dominate the market. On the surface, it was a brilliant offer. The business world would be at her feet. But Clara felt something stir inside her, a warning. She had trusted him once, and the aftermath had been a wake-up call. Vincent had his own agenda, his own vision of success. He wanted to control her, not just the business. Clara felt the sting of betrayal again. Could she trust Vincent again, or was he simply a new version of the Hadleys? As the proposal lingered on her desk, Clara was torn. Her heart told her to walk away, but her mind told her this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She had worked hard to get here, but at what cost? The pressure was starting to wear Clara down. The constant decisions, the legal battles, the betrayals, it was all becoming too much. She had worked so hard for everything she had, but now that she was at the top, she felt alone. Every move she made seemed to alienate someone. Her relationship with her mother had grown increasingly strained. Clara knew her mother didn't fully understand the choices she had to make. How could she? Her mother had trusted the Hadleys, and Clara had spent so much time fighting to undo that trust. But as Clara grew in power, she began to feel more and more disconnected from her past. The mansion, the wealth, it all seemed empty. She thought that by getting everything she wanted, she would be whole, but instead, Clara felt like something was missing. The loneliness was overwhelming. Had she sacrificed too much? Was the price of success worth losing herself? She spent long hours in the mansion, contemplating. What had she become? The person she had once been seemed so far away. Clara was on the brink of a breakdown. Her empire had grown, but her soul felt like it was falling apart. Clara's trust was shattered once again, this time by someone she never thought would betray her. Jenna, who had been her ally throughout the Hadley ordeal, had been working with Vincent DeLuca behind her back. "I didn't know how to tell you," Jenna confessed, her voice filled with guilt. "But I had to do it. Vincent promised me a place in his empire." Clara's heart sank. Jenna had been the one person she thought she could rely on, the one person who had helped her uncover the Hadleys' secrets. And now she had turned her back on Clara for personal gain. The betrayal was crushing. Clara had spent so much of her life trusting others, only to be burned again and again. This time it wasn't just about the money. It was about the people she had trusted. Could Clara ever truly trust anyone again? The walls around her were closing in. How many more people would betray her before it was all over? Clara had worked so hard to rise above the Hadleys, only to realize that the cost of success was even greater than she had imagined.